This is a special report from About Space Today.
Welcome to Special Report. I'm David Denault. Starliner astronauts Butch Wilmore and Suni Williams are stranded in space until they can catch a ride back home in February with Crew 9. NASA Administrator Bill Nelson announced the decision.
NASA has decided that Butch and Suni will return with Crew 9 next February, and that Starliner will return uncrewed and bring the Boeing Starliner home uncrewed is a result of a commitment to safety. Our core value is safety, and it is our North Star.
What was to be an 8-day mission has now lasted 80 days, and that will eventually become 8 months stranded in space. Now, NASA talked about their understanding of prolonged space flight for up to a year. But what about the psychological and emotional effects for an unanticipated prolonged mission that might have for both these crew members, especially Wilmore, who has 2 young daughters? Joining me to discuss the possible psychological and emotional effects this might have for both crew members is Suzi Meffen from Melbourne, Florida, who is a licensed clinical social practitioner with more than 40 years of experience. She also had an 11-year radio show in Atlanta where she interviewed many notable authors and clinicians. Thanks for joining me and talk with me about the possible psychological and emotional effects this might have on the crew.
Really going to be impactful on the crew and their family and their friends. And there's several ways to look at it. First of all, we have to look at the psychological effects of long-term space flight. And that includes several different areas. Physically, they are impacted. Macro structures can be impacted. Even the brain can change with long-term space flight. So you're going from a short-term mission and looking forward to seeing your family and your friends and being back in your normal life. So everyone is going to deal with disappointment. Now, I know that they really vet and interview and have requirements psychologically and emotionally for their astronauts. So my guess is they're going to be screening for any psychological problems or issues. But my concern is that that kind of stress could create in someone who is not vulnerable or does not have a biological depression or an anxiety disorder, that kind of stress and the physical long-term space flight can create anxiety, depression, even some depersonalization or derealization just because of how long-term space flight affects the brain. So they are going to be emotionally dysregulated. These are symptoms from the National Institute of Health on looking at long-term space flight in astronauts. They could have cognitive dysfunction, disruption of sleep-wake rhythm, and you know how that's going to affect any of us when we have difficulty getting to sleep. You're not as clear or sharp the next day. So they're going to have a lot of that effect. It can even be visual phenomena, changes in body weight, along with morphological brain changes. That was the one that was really surprising to me, that the brain can actually change under microgravity and such a long mission.
What about the families at home? What do you think effect it has on them?
Well, unfortunately, when I was thinking about this, what I thought mostly about is the process of grief and acceptance. And again, depending on the person's psychological resilience and emotional strength is going to be different. So you're going to have some people that react to accepting this reality in an emotionally strong way, but people are usually going to have to go through the processes We used to say that the process of grief and acceptance was a step-by-step process. We know now that there are these stages of acceptance, but instead of going through them in a step-by-step process, it's more like a spiral that each time you pass by these different steps, you spend less time in them emotionally and cognitively. So the first stage that everyone, crew members and family members, are going to go through is that stage of shock and denial. But what the brain is trying to do is protect them from the grief. So the grief of really accepting this is going to be 80 days until I see my mom, my dad. This is going to be months longer than we thought. So the brain is trying to gently let us accept that fact. So if you're a child, imagining, first of all, the brain isn't even fully developed until age 28. So their ability to have that resilience is going to be very different based on personality.
Suzi, if somebody wanted to contact you, how would they do that?
SuziMeffen.com, SuziMeffen.com, or 678-570-8169.
Thank you for joining us and explaining a little bit more on what the astronauts will be facing in this 8-month journey stranded in space.
Thank you so much, Dave. I appreciate it.
Suzi Meffen, licensed clinical social practitioner. Well, both are paid professional NASA astronauts on a crew flight test. It just hasn't gone as planned. So we can only wish for a Merry Christmas and a happier New Year to Butch and Suni and their families. I'm David Denault.
This has been a special report from About Space Today.